What's up, everybody? So recently I posted on Instagram and Twitter about the concept of how often should you sprint, and I got some pretty good responses from it, and people seem to be interested in the topic, so I figured we'd make a little video here to talk about it in more depth. So when it comes to deciding how often should you sprint, how often should you lift, and just generally how often should you train, I think there's a number of factors we need to consider. First and foremost in my mind is tissue recovery. Now, oftentimes when people talk about sprinting, they talk about the nervous system, but in my mind, the thing that's going to cause you the biggest problems in your training are tissue-related injuries. So even though sprinting is a very neuromuscularly driven activity, the nervous system plays a large role in the performance and all that, and you need to make sure that your nervous system is recovered. Tissue issues like strains, tendinitis, things like that, those are going to cause you way more problems than being a little tired when you show up to sprint one day. So the first thing you need to consider is how long does it take you to recover between your sessions from a tissue perspective? How long are your hamstrings sore? How long are your Achilles tendons sore? You know, your adductors, your hips, all that stuff. If you go from one session into the next session and, you know, you have a significant pain in your groin or your hamstrings or something like that, that's not a day to sprint fast. And if on a regular basis you're experiencing that, then you're probably sprinting too frequently for the amount of volume and the intensities that you're working at. So if that's the situation that you're in, you need to spread those sessions out and consider reducing the volume. I think the volume in the session is going to have the biggest impact on how much your tissues are affected, because as you train, there's going to be a certain amount of protein breakdown in your body. As you train, you're breaking down muscles, tendons, all that stuff gets sort of worn down in a training session. The more you do in a training session, the more that's going to happen. And your recoverability is limited based on your genetics, your habits, your diet, your sleep, all that stuff. So if you go too deep into the, into the deep end of the pool in a session, so to speak, it's going to set you up to where you're going to be excessively sore. It's going to take you longer to recover, and that session may just be detrimental because you did too much. So sprinting more and more and more and more is not what makes you faster. Honing your technique, exposing yourself to, specific conditioning for the max velocity sprints, the maximum intensity accelerations, the short speed endurance, all that stuff. That's what we're after. We're not after how much can I sprint in a session before I, pass out. Second to tissue recovery is neuromuscular fatigue. So you don't want to go into a session too tired because you're not going to be in a position to run with good form. If your brain is super tired, then you're not going to run well. When you are not running well from a technique perspective, you're more at risk of injury because you might move in a way that is, you're hitting the ground in the wrong spot, or maybe the coordination between muscle fibers and muscle groups are not great, so your ability to relax and contract gets disturbed, and just simply your overall outputs won't be as high if you're fatigued. So we also need to consider how long does it take for you to feel awake and not fried mentally after a sprinting session. Then we have to consider the volume and frequency. So if you tend to do very large volume sessions for whatever reason, then you're going to have to space out your sessions more. And that's going to affect the frequency of your training. So if you want to train very regularly, if you want to sprint, lift, do this stuff, 6 times a week, then those sessions need to be fairly small in terms of volume, because otherwise you may get through a week or a few weeks of training with high frequency and high volume, but eventually it's going to come back to bite you, and you're not going to be able to sustain that for years on end. So the more volume you do, the less frequently you're pretty much going to be able to train. If you want to train more frequently, the volume in each session needs to be reduced, and that goes for sprinting, lifting, jumping, any form of training you're doing. Another thing to consider is, are you training or are you looking to test your performance or compete? If you're just training, you can go into sessions with a little bit of fatigue, and that's all right. It's not that big of a deal. I don't think I know any athletes who are never fatigued when they train, but it's something that you need to manage. Whereas if you're looking to test your performance, like you want to see, okay, this day I'm testing my, flying 30, and I need to really get a good idea of where I'm at. Or maybe you're testing your 100 in practice, or you're going to a pro day with your 40-yard dash, or you're competing at a meet. If you're testing or competing, then you need to prioritize being recovered, and that's where giving yourself more room between sessions is going to be beneficial, and the sessions you do leading up to that test or up to that meet need to be very moderate in their volume and probably in the intensity too, so you don't risk being burnt out when you go to do it. And then the last thing, at least for now, to consider is, what are the life stressors that you're dealing with? Are you going to school? Do you work full time? Do you have kids? Are they doing construction outside your house so you're not able to sleep as much, or whatever it is? The aggregate stress load of your life is going to play a role in how much you can train. If you're super stressed out by your job or relationship issues or school, then you're not going to have as much energy available to you to train. So you're going to have to reduce the amount of training you do, spread those sessions out, and you need to take into consideration that life stress. Whereas if you have everything paid for in your life, you don't have to do anything but train. It's going to be a lot easier for you to train more frequently at a higher intensity and with more volume, because all you have to focus on is getting to the workout, eating, sleeping, and doing whatever you need to recover in between. When we look at research and anecdotal experience, I think there's some things we can learn. So research suggests that it can take up to 72 hours to recover from an intense lifting or sprinting session. Some of this research was done with very high volume workloads. So 72 hours may be on the, high end of the spectrum, but I've experienced it where when I set a personal best, it took me weeks before I felt good again, and I've heard that with other athletes too. I'm sure some people aren't as sensitive to that, but when I ran 11 meters per second in May, which was the fastest I'd ever run, it took me a really long time to feel like I could sprint anywhere close to that level again, and I still haven't. So if you're running really fast, you're probably going to need, multiple days to recover. If you're doing a very intense lifting session, it's going to take multiple days to recover. It doesn't mean we can't do any training, but we need to be sure that the training we're doing, if we're fatigued when we train, that it's appropriate for that level of fatigue, and we're not going to, risk digging ourselves a deeper hole that we're going to have to climb out of at some point. Strength training is typically more taxing than power training, so if you're lifting and you're doing heavy strength training, that's going to take longer to recover from than, say, power training, which is done with lighter loads and faster bar velocities. Both are going to elicit fatigue that can last multiple days, but the heavier and slower that lifting is, because it's heavy and hard, that's going to cause more fatigue. Now, Charlie Francis, everybody probably should know, his approach was to sprint every other day because he said that the nervous system needs 48 hours to recover. Now, there's more factors at play than your nervous system, but I think it's it's kind of a heuristic. It's something that you can keep in mind and is just simple to understand, and it helps you think about things in a better way, even if it's not 100% correct. They would sprint like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example, and then do tempo sessions on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Now, can you do that? I mean, maybe you can, but I haven't met many people who can do that long-term consistently. Why? There were factors at play, like PEDs, which significantly enhance their ability to recover. So if you go and look at, say, the Charlie Francis training program, and you think, oh, wow, this is, the ultimate way to train. I need to train 6 times a week. I need to sprint and lift Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I need to do tempo sessions with 2,500 meters of volume on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I hate to break it to you, but you're probably going to hit a wall at some point and not be able to do that sustainably over the long term. So this isn't to poke at Charlie Francis. I think he was a great coach, and he gave a lot to the sport, and I have nothing but respect for him. But anytime that you see a coach's training program or a pro athlete's training program, you have to understand they're in a situation that is different from you. Whether it's, the Ben Johnson type of situation, or they have, the best massage therapists and doctors and all these treatments, and their whole life is taken care of and all they have to do is train, they're going to be in a different situation as far as how often they can train and how much they can train than you or me. Rarely have I been able to consistently sprint 3 times per week without running into some issue, whether it's a slight strain, painful tendons, or feeling burnt out. So when I tell you that, you may want to just sprint twice a week at least to start, and then sprinkle in an extra session here and there, it's from experience where when I've pushed it too much, I invariably get hurt. And it's just how it is. You can only train so much before something's going to break. So, I would like you guys to learn from my mistakes and take into consideration the fact that you may be better off sprinting less often, because you're going to be able to get more quality sessions in throughout a year than if you sprinted a bunch and lifted a bunch for a month and then you got hurt and now you have to take a month off. Then it takes another month to get back to where you were. And if you were to, stretch that out over a year, you'd probably get more quality training in by sprinting and lifting less each week but being able to do that every single week without a training break. So how can you approach your training? Well, I think the first thing to do is to start with 2 sprinting sessions and 2 lifting sessions per week. That could be sprint on Monday, lift on Tuesday, take Wednesday off or do some active recovery like biking or something like that. Sprint on Thursday, lift on Friday, and then take Saturday and Sunday off. Another way you can do it, which is what I've been doing lately with my online training group, is to sprint on Monday, lift on Tuesday, take an active recovery day Wednesday, do some kind of tempo or light plyometric session on Thursday, active recovery on Friday, and then sprint and lift on Saturday, and then take Sunday off. That's not what we do every single week, but that's what we've been doing lately. And I think it's a good way to get a mixture of training in while having everything spread out enough that you're not too burnt out when you come back to train. Another way you could do it would be to sprint on Monday, lift on Tuesday, take Wednesday off, sprint Thursday, take Friday off, and then sprint and lift Saturday, take Sunday off. So that's basically, pretty similar variation of what I have the online training group doing. If you, for whatever reason, want to sprint more, then you need to microdose your training. You need to reduce the volume of each session. So say you wanted to sprint 4 times per week and lift twice a week. That might look like sprint on Monday, sprint and lift on Tuesday, take Wednesday off, then repeat that, and then take Saturday and Sunday off. But if you're doing that, you're going to have to reduce the amount of sprinting you're doing in each session by a significant amount, because otherwise when you come back from that first session to sprint the second day, you're going to be burnt out and you're going to have, soreness and things like that that's going to inhibit your ability to sprint. So I don't advise doing this. I do know people who have had success with a high frequency program, but you have to manage things very carefully when you do that. So it is one way you can go about it, but it's not what I would suggest for most people. To wrap things up, here's a few tips for managing your training schedule. You can rotate between 2 and 3 days of sprinting per week. And if you're just lifting, it could be the same kind of thing. If you're only lifting and not sprinting, you can probably lift more often. But for the sake of this discussion, let's talk about sprinting. Rotate between 2 and 3 days per week. So maybe one week you do 3 days, but then the following week you do 2 days. That way you're still getting, 5 sessions in 2 weeks, which is pretty good. But you're giving yourself more room to recover in that second week or in the first week, depending on which one you use for the 2 versus 3 days of sprinting per week. So it's not like you have to have every single week be the same amount of training. You can zoom out, and this is another tip, you can zoom out to say a 10-day microcycle or a 14-day microcycle instead of a 7-day microcycle, which will allow you to fit all your training into the cycle without, going overboard and packing things in and hurting your recovery. So maybe you need to look at 10 days instead of 7 days, or 14 days instead of 7 days, plot out all the training you want to do in that cycle, and just approach it that way. Within that, you can still utilize this first tip of rotating between 2 and 3 days per week. But I think zooming out a little bit with your microcycle and then being willing to change the amount of days you sprint per week so that some weeks are a little bit more intense and higher frequency, other weeks are more recovery focused with less frequency. That's one way where you can get more training done without setting yourself up for as many problems, compared to if you were just sprinting 3 times a week, every week forever. And last but not least, when in doubt, leave some gas in the tank so you can recover enough for your next session. If you have 6 sprints planned for your session, maybe it's, 3 times 30 and 3 times 50. Well, if you do the 330s and you feel good, then you do 2 of the 50s and you feel like you ran fast, but you're pretty tired and you don't think the next one's going to be any faster. Maybe you just leave that last sprint, don't do it, and that allows you to be more recovered for your next session. Just because you wrote it down on a piece of paper does not mean that you have to do it. We can't predict the future. We can't know how our body's going to respond to a training session. So yes, you should have some kind of program set out, but it doesn't mean you have to follow it exactly. And if you're planning to train more frequently because you want to, or you feel that's what you need to do, then you need to err on the side of caution. Allow yourself to, not do that last rep if you feel like it's going to take away from that next session, or if you feel some aches and pains coming on, if you feel like you're getting quite fatigued. All of these are reasons to just let a little bit of that work drop off, don't do it, and save it for the next session. Nobody's ever gone wrong by looking at their session and thinking, well, I've sprinted fast, I've done a good session, but I haven't done all my reps. I'm going to go home and just recover instead of doing this last rep. You know, nobody's lost a gold medal over that or anything like that, at least in my opinion. Where they have lost gold medals or, you know, not been able to make it to a championship meet or missed an opportunity on a PR in a season was when they did too much, got hurt, and then weren't able to train or compete. So when in doubt, leave some energy in the tank, leave something on the table so that way you can come back in your next session, have a good session, get the most out of it, and continue to do that over the long term. If you can train consistently without a training break, you're going to make much better progress than if you do more training over a short period of time, end up getting hurt, then have to take time off and take time to get back to where you were before when that injury occurred. So thanks for tuning in. Hope this helps. I'll catch you guys next time. This is Cody Bidlow with SprintingWorkouts.com and ATHLETE.X signing off.